Welcome to the AWIP podcast. I'm your host, Rae Smith. Here we focus on investigations and all things animal welfare related. We're bringing you in depth conversations each week with animal welfare professionals around the globe, so be sure to find us on LinkedIn, YouTube, and Spotify. To learn more about AWIP and our mission, check us out at awip.org.uk or at awipusa.com. So our guest for today is Will Zweigart. He is the founder and the executive director of Flatbush Cats in New York. So without any further ado, we're going to jump into it. Will, thanks for coming onto the podcast. How are you doing?
I'm great. Thanks so much for having me, Rae.
Yeah, I think one of the things I love the most about this is getting to meet so many different people from around the country and their respective fields and just kind of talking about animal welfare issues in general. Will, how did you end up getting into animal welfare and where you are today?
Yeah, it was unplanned. I was working in corporate advertising and marketing for a long time, and I thought that was my career. I didn't anticipate that I would be doing anything else. So I'd kind of worked my way up to a great role with one of the best advertising agencies in the world in Manhattan. And I was like, okay, I'm doing my thing. This is this, but it never really felt fulfilled. It's kind of helping, to be honest, I feel like sometimes I was helping global brands and corporations pretend to care about the environment, for example, when
Yeah.
they structurally don't. And so I felt like I was using the art and science of marketing in sort of a not always the most constructive way. Then my partner and I moved to a different part of New York City that was significantly less resourced than other areas I had lived in. We noticed cats everywhere. And this was very jarring for me because um, I had no idea, as someone who had lived in New York City for more than a decade, I had no idea that we had such a massive cat overpopulation problem. I don't like that term because it's kind of cold, but I had no idea there was so much suffering outside. Let me say that. And it was heartbreaking. I don't know how to describe, moving from an area where you never see cats outside to on every block, there would be 2 or 3 colonies. I didn't even know what a colony was. And now we're seeing, all the stuff that I see every day now, but seeing it for the first time kind of threw me into this, what can we do? We thought about it first as individuals, like what can we do? And so I was like Googling stuff. I thought maybe I'll get someone out here to come take care of it. That's hilarious, right? Yeah, sure. Yeah, it turns out you're the someone. And so we was Googling. I didn't even know about things like trap, neuter, return, found out about that. And it literally took 3 to 6 months from the time that I was interested and committed and trying to figure this out. It took almost half a year to find a training class, get the training class because it was like a month out. This was pre-COVID, so it was in person. Get TNR certified, find some spay neuter appointments, borrow traps because we didn't have a car, anything like that. All the stuff that you have to do to just get one colony fixed, it took us about 6 months to figure that out. And I remember thinking, we were very committed. Our sense of urgency was high, but if it took someone who's capable at these kinds of things 6 months to figure this out, it's such a challenging journey for someone to get involved. And I remember thinking like we could do better than that. And so we later went on to found Flatbush Cats about a year later. So I was rescuing cats with every free moment, nights and weekends, and then doing the advertising stuff. And it's funny, I laugh now because like advertising agencies are notoriously difficult to work in, and like you work long hours and you have high stress, but it's literally hilarious to me now because I'm like, why was I so busy? What was I working on? Like, why was I so stressed? Who cares about any of this stuff? You move into the animal welfare world and it's, way busier. The stakes are way higher. People get paid a fraction of what they would get paid to do, corporate advertising. And it feels like this really matters. Lives are at stake. And so it was really kind of burning the candle at both ends. And I definitely experienced burnout. I was actually let go from one of my jobs because I couldn't think about anything else. I would come to work and I'm just like, I'm thinking about that kitten that I saw on the way to the subway. And I'm thinking about, how am I going to find homes for the cats that we just rescued, and new colonies that need to be trapped, and where we're going to get the surgery appointments, and blah, blah, blah. And that was a distinct phase. And Flatbush Cats was formed in 2018 with a broader mission, though. The mission was to find systemic solutions to address the cat overpopulation crisis, because it was pretty clear, even after just a few months, that all of the work that we were doing, while it was important, absolutely not going to solve the problem, right? And
Right.
I think that's something that I'm passionate about discussing, because I think we all need to be willing and able to reflect on the role that we play in this broader issue. And are we willing to acknowledge whether what we're doing is solving the problem or just treating the symptoms? So there was a transition period between, 2018, 2019. And at this point, I'm starting to research the broader issue, starting to ask questions like, why has spay neuter funding, become sort of non-existent? Why is it so hard to get spay neuter appointments?
Mm-hmm.
Why are the shelters always so overcrowded, not just with cats, but with dogs? And just, I guess the ultimate question is, what do we need to do to actually solve this? I had made a promise to the cats that we rescued during those early years, that I make this promise to cats that we rescue now, is that we're not just going to help you. We're going to get to the bottom of this. We're going to find a way to prevent other cats like you from suffering in the future. And so everything else that we've done since has been, a journey to answer that question.
Well, I'm wondering, at the beginning, when you said that you were invested in, trapping this first colony, and it took, 3 6 months, were there any resources online from the city government, from, animal control, from the shelter, saying, this is the process, and here are all the resources, and here's where you get traps, and here's where you do, where you sign up for appointments for spay neuter and doing TNR? Did any of that exist? Was it prevalent for people, like the community, to just find that information?
Somewhat, but it's very misleading. I can't think of the word. It almost feels like a special kind of gaslighting or something, because there's websites that are like, here's a list of spay neuter providers. And it's not until you actually go through the list you realize, oh, that website's been dead for 2 years. This company doesn't do vouchers anymore. This place, you have to call them, and it turns out that they're not doing mobile clinics anymore. This place is doing clinics, but they're booked out for 6 weeks. So it's very misleading. And I think that's a big source of frustration for me personally, and something that I want to solve. I think in the future, those resources should be real.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm being dead serious. Like, when we say we offer something, there's two elements to it. There's affordability and there's accessibility, and they're different, right? So the websites listed on New York City pages would say that things are available, but they're not. And you literally cannot get them. And that's very frustrating and misleading for folks who are trying to do the right thing. In many cases, volunteers who are trying to help fix, cats that ultimately are the city's responsibility. Specifically around accessibility, we are in the early days, we tried a pilot project where I was like, well, are there any mobile clinics that we could bring to Flatbush? Flatbush is a neighborhood within central Brooklyn. And I was like, who could I get to just come here and like do surgeries? And so we spent months like working on a partnership, and brought a clinic got some funding, brought a clinic there. And it was both exciting and frustrating, because, a lot of the services at that time were first come, first serve. You've maybe heard the phrase that lower income people have their time stolen from them often. And so the assumption was, because it's free, you'll just line up. And if you get it, great. And if not, like, tough. And I remember showing up at like 5:30 in the morning to like manage the sign up sheet for the clinic. And there was already 35 people there who were waiting in the cold. I mean, it was still dark out. It was cold. It's New York. It's freezing outside. It's pitch black out. Sun hasn't come up yet. And I just get this sinking feeling in my gut, knowing that the line is more than twice as long as our capacity for that day. The mobile truck could do maybe 17 surgeries, and we had people still showing up because the check-in was at 7. And so, this journey has been like lots of breakthroughs and new steps, and then you kind of realize at every step it's still not enough, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, it shows the desperate need from people and pets, and feral cats. I think, around the country, really. And yeah, I think that New York is a shining example of this because, there's the population so high, it's so dense. There's so many cats there. I think I was reading something that there's, well over 1 million feral cats within New York. And I've talked to so many people about the state of sheltering in their state or in their city, and, the resounding reply is that it's in general poor. The access to care, affordable care is not there. There's not enough spay neuter. And, we have so many different programs. We have so many different rescue, volunteer, we have all these large organizations, Bissell and all of these, the United Spay Alliance doing all of these high volume, high quality spay neuter across the country. And it still seems like it's not enough. And so, I wanted to come back to a point that you had mentioned kind of at the beginning, is that these services ultimately are the city's responsibility. And, I've been reading a lot of, I'm not in New York, but I've been reading a lot about how New York and the city and the government is kind of handling this kind of thing. And it seems very apparent that they're focusing more so on downstream resources. So the actual sheltering of animals, which is extremely expensive, extremely time consuming, it uses up a lot of resources. And the article that I read was that New York spends less than 5% of their animal welfare budget on upstream measures like spay neuter. So can you kind of talk about that in your experience? Like, does that sound accurate to you?
Yeah, and I think that data point actually came from me because I couldn't find, like, I was trying to give the reporter who wrote an article about the state of the state in New York City, and I couldn't find the data myself. It took me so long just to get a ballpark estimate, and it's actually probably even lower than that. It's like, maybe less than 1% of current New York City animal welfare funding. And it's wild to me. Like, it's absolutely wild that it's such an uphill battle to get folks to look at the facts and look at a pragmatic, assessment of the problem. And we're spending in New York City, we spend, I want to say, 34 million a year on sheltering and almost nothing on spay and neuter services. And so we've been talking to, I think this is one of our next big battles. And to be honest with you, I'm not looking forward to it because I can't stand bureaucracy. I don't like to move slowly.
Yeah.
But, when you look at, let's just take a broader step back. So the ASPCA's strategy and research team estimates that New York City needs well over 200,000 affordable, accessible spay neuter appointments per year. So we talked about what accessible means, right? So I'm not talking about people standing, outside at 3 a.m. That's not dignified, and that's not, we can do better than that, right? 200,000 a year. And right now the city has budgeted to do around 3,000 a year. It's absolutely wild. And so, yeah. And so to me, it's kind of a common sense thing, but you could spend a decade just trying to get people to engage with the basic details around this. I think our next big fight from Flatbush Cats perspective is going to be to engage city leaders over a several year time period to structurally change how they look at and how they fund animal welfare. And there's a couple different things we're going to be working on there. Again, you can kind of hear my apprehension. Like, this is not going to be easy. It's not going to be quick. It's not going to be fun. But, like, no way are we going to solve this unless we go to the root. Absolutely go to the very root of the issue. And we fundraised to build, it was a lot of hard work, but we fundraised through private and individual support the resources needed to build our first veterinary clinic, which I'm happy to talk more about.
Yeah.
But that clinic at our maximum capacity next year, and this is in a best case scenario, we can do 10,000 spay neuter surgeries. And that's amazing. And that's going to have a big impact.
Yeah.
But again, I want to solve this. So what does that look like? That looks like having 20 times that across the city, several spay neuter clinics per borough. And we're not going to settle for anything less. Why should we? Why don't we get this figured out? And then we can, you can add New York City to the list of metro areas that have turned the tide and are seeing lower shelter intake. The three things that we're going to be asking for from the beginning to see this progress are: one, incremental budget next year. So additional funding in the 2026 fiscal budget for New York City that starts July 1, 2025. So we're about a half year ahead. We're going to be asking for the city to create a new line item for making spay, neuter, and veterinary care more affordable and accessible. That's not currently in their budget. And we're not going to tolerate, the typical responses that you see when you bring these up. People say, it's been a difficult budget year. Where are we gonna find that new money? I'm not here for that.
Right.
If you want me to find,
That's what they say every year.
yeah, I'm absolutely not accepting that as an answer. If you want me to help you find waste in the $110 billion budget, which is larger than most countries, I'll help you find the waste. You have the money. Don't waste your time or mine telling me that you can't fund this. We can fund whatever we want. Absolutely fund whatever we want. And we have all the proof of that. Second thing we're going to be asking for is new legislation. So you got to have both. You need to have the funding and you need to have the policy and the legislation. So about 20 years ago, my numbers are not always correct here in the city stuff because I'm just learning about it, but 15 to 20 years ago, they successfully passed legislation that said that every borough should have its own shelter. So we have 5 boroughs, 5 shelters. Now, implementation of that is the challenge, right? That policy by itself did not include funding to build those shelters. A whole separate conversation on whether it's an effective use of the city's resources to build more shelters at all. But the policy that we'd be asking for is similar legislation mandating that every borough should have an affordable or several spay neuter clinics that are accessible to its residents. The third thing that we need to see happen here, and it's going to be a big push to make this happen, is we need to pull all animal welfare out from under the Department of Health, which has absolutely no business with any of this stuff. I think it just got put there a couple decades ago, and that's just where it's been sitting. We need a separate Department of Animal Welfare in New York City that is funded and staffed appropriately. And that is something that is structural to the city of New York. It doesn't matter, which mayor is in office and who's friendly to animal welfare or not. These are fixed budget items, and not really going to accept anything less than those 3 things to solve this.
Well, I find that really interesting because most animal shelters are either classified under the Department of Safety, so, with police or the sheriff's office, or under the Department of Health, because if you have animal control in there, they're doing the public health, rabies, quarantine, stuff like that. And so it's normal for that to happen. But I think that, with your insights about, it sounds like the entire general, area of animal welfare there in New York City is not being run well, is that they don't have the funding and they don't have the push or the motivation from, whoever it is who may be, towards the top of the department to be able to advocate for, access to affordable care. And really, I mean, even that part alone is so expansive, because you can't talk about that without talking about income levels for people and access to affordable, pet inclusive housing, which is, monstrous issue. There was we just talked about this on the last episode, that people who are making $75,000 or less have a significantly more difficult time affording access to care for their pets. And the most recent statistics I had seen is that that's the average income for, the average New Yorkers it was like just under $75,000.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you could look at it from a macro perspective, to your point, right? Just look at, household income, look at, what it costs to go to the vet. This is a nationwide issue. And I'm still learning about the entire municipal side, but so I'm not an expert there. But from what I've heard from other folks, you can look at most of the hot spots in the country, California, Texas, they're having the same issue with like the Department of Health is not leading. They're not engaged. They have other things to worry about. And they do. Like, I have a lot of respect for, obviously, this is the largest Department of Health in the country, and they have a lot to deal with. Fine, makes total sense. Let someone else do animal welfare. It's not getting the time and attention that it needs. So like, if you're a manager and one of your employees has 20 things on their plate, what's the first thing you do? What does not need to be on your plate? Like, we can't ask you to succeed if you're responsible for 20 things, right?
Right.
And obviously, since the formation of departments of health across the country decades ago, our relationship to pets and animals has changed, and we're now moving away from a primary mandate to just protect people from animals. And now we have a different mandate. It's to ensure that we can keep people and pets together.
Well, we're so much more aware, I think, like generally speaking, of the human animal bond. There's been so much talk and research, and data put out there about how that bond really is so integral to the health and welfare of, I mean, not just the pet, but the owner as well. I mean, we're seeing more often people surrendering their pets because they can't afford it. They're moving. They can't find housing where, they're allowed to have their, cat or dog. I mean, they're quite literally abandoning animals on the street because the shelters are full. There was just an article, I've already talked about this, I know. They just opened a pretty big shelter in Queens, right? And within a month, it was operating over 210% capacity in a month. I mean, to me, it's shocking, but it's also kind of not shocking because it just, I think, sets a very prime example of the state of sheltering in New York, and just showing that opening more shelters is not the solution here. Like, when COVID hit, we didn't build more morgues, we didn't build more hospitals. Like, the solution was an upstream solution. It was the vaccine. So to me, it's very, very basic. The spay neuter is the solution to, the overpopulation problem. It is the solution to preventing all of this suffering. It is the solution to helping, your municipal government animal shelters, but also the backlog that ends up funneling into these other rescues, cat rescues and all different kinds of dog rescues and stuff like that. I mean, it's because there's no room anywhere. You can't even say, take your dog to the shelter, surrender it and say, oh, well, if they're full, like, well, they'll just send it to like a Pekingese rescue, because there's no room.
Yeah.
I just and I'm so and so I love that there's so many more people who are opening up to this understanding of that we're not going to be able to shelter, adopt, foster our way out of this problem, whether it comes to cats or dogs. Is spay is the way. I mean, I've been trying to push that kind of idea. Spay is the way.
Yeah. And specific to what structural change looks like, this is my first year having a lot of conversations with city council members about this issue. And coming into it, my question was, are they not aware of the issue or do they not care? And I don't want to present it in a polarizing light because ultimately organizing and advocacy requires that we bring people in and we don't judge or ostracize them based on their current beliefs at this moment, right?
Right, but we have to understand.
Yeah. And what I found is that the vast majority of city leaders that I've talked to had no idea. They have no idea what's going on here. I would attribute that to the fact that there's a lot of other things on their plate, like they may be focused on other issues and for good reason. But we have to accept that these are not mutually exclusive. If you're a city leader, if you're a public servant, you need to be able to juggle, multiple policy positions at any given time. You need to be able to work for anything that's going to make your city more livable, more affordable, more humane. And so I noticed there's a lack, there hasn't been a push. Like, we're a small organization, we're not a big player. The SPCA is based in New York City, and they are quite literally 100 times our size, right? So I don't take this lightly, but I'm just being honest that the assessment and the need that I see is that we're going to have to get this on the radar of city leaders. And it's very important that we do that from a solutions oriented perspective. I'm new to this space, and I'm watching animal rights advocates. I'm watching people throw mud and criticize shelter employees, criticize city leaders, and just basically a lot of antagonizing. Not a lot of discussion about what the solution should look like. And I'm watching city leaders. They feel like they have permission to tune you out. If all you're doing is slinging mud and criticizing and attacking and harassing, guess what? You gave them permission to ignore you for life.
Mm-hmm.
I'm seeing this firsthand. They do not have any obligation to listen to you because you are harassing them. And so we're trying to bring solutions and talk about what the benefits are, to your point, to moving upstream. And the good news is that there are myriad benefits. It's a better use of our taxpayer dollars. It results in, obviously, I mean, you get this and our audience gets this, but it results in, less suffering, fewer intakes, happier constituents, happier New Yorkers. Like, it's one leader told me this is the last nonpartisan issue left because everyone loves their pets. So I'm like, great, let's go. Let's get this done. I was just shocked at how little people know or think or care about this issue. And I'm not talking to these folks as an animal rights advocate. I'm talking to them as a New Yorker who cares about my fellow New Yorkers. I'm talking to them as a veterinary care provider, as a health care provider who can benefit the lives of our community members. And I think that gets a little bit more traction from that perspective.
Do you feel like the general community has kind of been awoken to these issues more, and cares about them more and wants to be involved more with, access to care and how that affects them, how that affects their neighbors, how it affects their animals? Do you feel like there's more like enlightenment from the community and their willingness to get involved, to go to, say, these, public meetings with, city council and whatnot, to try to bring about change, or at least try to express their concern of like, we think this is a problem and we want solutions to it?
Not yet. And that is the opportunity, and that is the challenge, because as I, again, just started to get into this issue, I was shocked that most people are not aware of this problem. You go back to my origin story here. I try to remember that you could be a New Yorker, you could be a cat or dog lover, you could have pets, and you could literally not know about this issue. And I hold the media ecosystem accountable for that. I hold large animal welfare organizations accountable for that. Anyone with resources in this space who is not spending even a little bit of time talking about the root causes is accountable for this problem. And so you're going to have outside agitators, like, again, Flatbush Cats is only a couple years old, small organization. Sometimes I get frustrated because I'm like, why is it our job to educate a city of 8.5 million people, including its leaders, about this problem? But the reality is, I'm not sure who else has both the capacity and the desire to do that. So to answer your question, no, I don't think most people are mobilized yet. I think that's what we need to do. And we need to frame it, again, through the lens of community care, because the folks who need these resources the most literally do not have the time to be advocating for their own needs. They don't have the time to call their city council member. They don't have the time to go to a block meeting. It's going to take folks who have the time and the resources, who want to make this a more livable and affordable city. They're going to have to get involved. And so one of the most interesting aspects of this over the next 10 years, because this is a long, long push, is helping animal lovers understand the role that they play in reinforcing the status quo. Not a fun topic,
Mhm.
but we all have to do some reflection, and we all have to understand, how are we inadvertently contributing to the status quo by not being aware of these issues, by not advocating for these issues. And I think when you give people an opportunity to do better, they will. When you show people that, hey, we can all get together and fundraise for a new clinic, and you give people a solution. If you're out there banging pots and pans and you don't have a solution, go back home. Figure out what you want to see in the world before you start agitating. And I think that we will get this done, but I just want to be very clear. To me, we're at the very beginning stages of this.
Do you think that it should be the government's responsibility to subsidize access to affordable care? I mean, I would say like for minor things starting out, spay, neuter, basic exams, vaccines, stuff like. I'm not talking about, your cat needs an MRI but your basic stuff. Do you think that that should be the government's responsibility given the state of sheltering and welfare?
Absolutely. And we've seen what happens when they don't do it. And so, again, like, we can talk about money all day. You want to tell me you think it's expensive? I'll show you what the cost of doing nothing is. You want to tell
Mhm.
me that, the city can't afford to spend $150 or $200 on spaying someone's dog? I'll show you the $1,000 bill that the city takes on when that dog ends up in a shelter. There's absolutely both a moral and a fiduciary case for that to happen. And given the scale of the problem and the fact that this has been neglected for decades, I think we do have to make some pretty significant changes. And again, these are not popular topics. Like, I come from the marketing and communications world, and what I'm so fascinated with is that it seems like we're kind of drinking from the fire hose right now, and it seems like we don't have mental energy required to engage in some of these complex issues. Like, we literally
Mhm.
don't. We're all exhausted. We don't have the mental energy to engage on these topics. Climate change would be another example, right? Like, where in today's media ecosystem do you see a rational conversation about the steps needed to be it's non-existent. And so, you're not going to get support from media ecosystem on this issue. And, what would a mindset shift look like? Well, next time a celebrity or an influencer decides to, donate some time and energy to this issue, success would look like them talking about spay neuter instead of just taking the easy route, talking about adoption.
Yeah.
Like, when someone's using their platform to promote adoption, it you can tell that there's a sense of generosity behind that, right? Like, they are trying to help. There's good intentions there, but it signals to me that they, again, either don't understand the problem or are not willing to engage on the problem, because I don't think there are no prominent voices in media, in the celebrity world, in the large animal welfare organization space. Who is leading this conversation? Honest question.
It falls on us, right? That's why we're
Yeah.
here talking about these things and raising awareness and trying to put it out there and promote like this is the problem. Whether you see it or not, take it from us. We are in the field understanding and working and seeing these things every single day. And I kind of get it from the like a city council's perspective, and wanting, if you wanted to build like a new subset of animal sheltering in New York, I think presenting the facts and historical statistics that back up why spay and neuter works. What are the consequences of aggressive, high quality, high volume spay neuter, in action? There was a lot of great work that was done in New Hampshire, that they took historical, they ran the statistics of this over like a decade period of time, in the 90s. Their shelter euthanasia has dropped 60% in 10 years. I mean, it affected everything. It affected the health and the quality of care that animals were getting. People were able to hang on to their animals. They didn't have to surrender them. Shelter euthanasias went down, intakes went down. I mean, to be able to provide those examples in like in a historical context of saying this is how we got away from spay neuter. And if we get back, this is already a proven example over a 10-year period of time of what can happen.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's That's why this is so surreal, is that you have plenty of examples of how this works, why this works, etc. And again, I know that city leaders just don't, not only do they not see the full picture, they're not seeing the postcard. They're not seeing anything. They literally do not understand this issue. And these are very smart people. So I kind of feel like they've had blinders on, and it's like, well, I'm working on all these other issues. And so they have this like super rudimentary understanding of the topic, and they think, oh, at the very least, we should provide a shelter. And that just speaks to how outdated most Americans' understanding is of this issue, is that, okay, well, then what? Because living in an under-resourced area, I can tell you, no one's bringing their animal to the shelter. This is what drives me crazy about the focus on release rates and things like that. Like, word gets out that shelter's going to put your animal down, and so no one brings their animal to a shelter. So shelter metrics, while very helpful as one piece of the puzzle, are not even the tip of the iceberg. It's misrepresenting what's actually happening in the city, because if I talk to 10 people in my neighborhood who could no longer keep their pet, literally none of them would bring that animal to the shelter. They would put it outside. They would try to give it to a friend. They might give it to the corner store. They would think rationally, well, this cat has a better chance of surviving outside because the shelter will just put it down. So, like, the entire model of measurement is flawed, if not corrupt. There's absolutely there's no benefit to just focusing on optimizing those numbers, when what that really means is that you're discouraging people from even using the shelter as a safety net.
Well, I think just the focus on, turning animals into numbers has done irreparable damage to the meaning of what shelters should be, to their reputations, to the directors, to anybody who works in a shelter, their reputations. They are the end product of a community caused problem, right? You cannot blame these shelters for their euthanasia rates, for whatever. I mean, they're there for a purpose. They're the end result of this community problem. And it's we try to avoid, the blame game and stuff, but there has to be recognition from the public that their choices affect not only the animal that they're abandoning or whatever, if they can't keep them anymore, but it does affect the entire system, and it affects all of the shelter workers who are there. It's kind of like self-perpetuating problem. And so that I kind of want to like, that's why I like where you're coming from, is like recentering the focus on solutions and not playing the blame game. Like, let's not blame our city leaders, let's not blame the shelter, let's not blame the public, let's not blame these organizations. This is what it is. We all know that this is the problem that this is. Let's focus on what can we do to make a difference, because sitting there and pointing fingers all day long is not getting us anywhere. It just isn't.
Yeah, it quite literally does not work. I mean, blame and shame is not a productive way to move something forward. And so, 2 years ago, we said, what do we need to do? I mentioned kind of looking in the mirror. We're doing several hundred rescues a year, several hundred trap neuter returns a year. And we had to be honest and say, like, we could just be doing that in perpetuity. It's not going to prevent the next cat from showing up. So we asked our neighbors on the blocks that we're working on, well, what do you need? Well, they need spay neuter. They need basic care. They need wellness visits. And so we realized that even if you were doing targeted work, if you're not getting all the animals inside the house fixed, it's, you're just going to be back every couple months. And so we did a, huge push to be able to build our own clinic. And it's amazing. We literally run a nonprofit, low-cost clinic in Flatbush now that offers affordable spay neuter surgery, affordable wellness appointments. Next year, we're going to be adding dental surgeries. I mean, we just did it, and the city did not fund that. Large animal organizations did not fund that. Individual donors and animal lovers and cat lovers funded that work. And it's a low-cost model, which means that it's not fully subsidized. And we found that works just fine, because most people do want to be able to provide for their pet. We should be way past the point of discussing whether everyone loves their pet. The research is out. Yeah, everyone at every income and socioeconomic level loves their pet. Let's put that one to bed. People want to be able to provide for their pet. And so I think there's the next chapter of this involves scaling that model, because sheltering is fully subsidized, right? And it's at the bottom of the journey. If you're opening these clinics, it's not fully subsidized. It costs you far less per client, and folks are able to keep their pets with them. Those pets are not going to end up in shelters, or far less likely to end up in shelters. And so, I think the only reason why we've been successful in our conversations with city leaders is that we have a solution to point to. And we've had, the chair of the Department of Health, major player, has said, I want to see more of your clinic in other boroughs. Like, we need to figure out how to scale that clinic. So again, as soon as you start talking about specific solutions, you are unlocking some movement. I just want to stress for anyone listening, like, you need to bring a solution to the conversation. Don't just throw mud and complain about what's happening at your shelter. You are wasting your time. And it's actually counterproductive. It's not just not a good use of time. It's actually making all of this worse, because people dig in their heels. They reinforce their current beliefs. City leaders can shut you out if you're even high levels of emotion, or some online trolls that aren't even associated with your group are attacking a city leader on Twitter or something. That's all it takes for them to just tune you out completely. Yeah. So we need to be bringing solutions, and we need to be doing this ourselves, because unfortunately, as you have seen, Rae, it's not happening. It's not happening from anyone else unless we take charge.
What's your plan then, Will? Do you plan on expanding? Is it that you physically want to expand, your clinics, the services you provide, the people and animals that you affect, the education that you give to the public?
Yeah, so the next couple of years are going to be hopefully big expansion time for us. We're going to be growing on both sides. So one, we want to open more clinics that can meet the needs of our community members. That's both Central Brooklyn and broader New York, pet owners. We also serve a lot of rescuers. We have over 500 rescuers who have signed up for discounted appointments and care at our clinic. That's an entire other ecosystem that we want to support. And then we're also launching some new community programs next year, because what we found is that it's not really a field of dreams. Like, you can build a clinic and people will come, but to reach the people that are actually sort of maybe inadvertently contributing to this problem the most, you got to go talk to those people. Like, you're going to have to do some concierge service. I know you've seen this in other markets, right? You got to be a presence on those blocks, and that takes time and resources. It takes you have to have the capacity to build relationships with community members, both to give them what they need and to understand what they might need, to anticipate what they might need. And so we're going to be building both of those out. Our two main focus areas as an org is one, veterinary care, and two, everything else I kind of lump it under something called community programs. So that's door-to-door outreach, canvassing, getting into the world. We're not there yet, but getting into the veterinary social work world, where you're really taking a holistic look at what resources might be most helpful for that family, not making any assumptions, rescuing friendly cats, teaching neighbors how to do trap, neuter, return, making resources available for them. That should be an easy process. If you have time and you want to help, we should be rolling out the red carpet for you to take advantage of that and get those cats fixed. I think what we're going to find is that when you combine those two resources, and only when you combine those two resources, veterinary care and community programs in one market, and I mean full depth, full saturation, like your team needs the resources and the autonomy to do whatever's needed to get the animals fixed and supported. Only when you attack it from both of those angles will you see meaningful progress. And so I think people have been saying, we need education, or TNR is not working, or we need spay neuter. It's like, yeah, we need all of them. And if you don't do all of them, you are not going to move the needle. But we can do that. We just have to start small. And I'd like to build, some use cases. I'd like to show some impact data around how this is working, make the case for city leaders that these are programs worth investing in. These are programs worth expanding. And if you only cared about money, they're a great deal, because you're going to cut down on your sheltering costs. So even if you don't care about any of this other stuff, it's a better use of your resources.
Well, I was just going to ask you one more question about the profitability of these low cost clinics, because I think there's sometimes this perpetuation. It's low cost, I'm never going to make a living as a vet or working here. What do you say about that?
It is a challenge, but it is a achievable challenge. And we're finding that line right now. So let me explain what some of the core tenets of Flatbush Veterinary Clinic are. That's the first clinic that we launched, Flatbush Vet for short. So first of all, you do need to pay staff well. So regardless of whether they are in shelter or community medicine, these are folks that are doing a highly specialized, very difficult job, and they're often coming in with lots of debt because it's a high cost of living area. So all of those add up to the fact that we need to pay the staff well. The mission is great, and it is frankly why some people are there, but the mission is not enough. The mission doesn't put food on your table or pay your rent. I believe that there's enough margin in the veterinary care space to do both, to pay your staff well and to be able to make services that are affordable or accessible. And we are doing research on this. So we've asked people who have the highest financial barriers, assuming a payment plan was available, what do you think an affordable, reasonable price to pay for a spay neuter is? And the answers range between $100 and $225 in New York City, which is kind of the sweet spot for where our services are priced. We are aiming to serve folks who are at 25 to 75% of the median household income in New York. The ASPCA is larger and has the resources to provide fully subsidized services. So I would say when you're looking at these clinics, you do have to make hard choices. You do have to be specific about who you serve, who you can serve, and who you cannot. So our goal is not to provide fully subsidized care. And research, again, shows that most people actually don't need that anyway. So that's what's most exciting about the model, is that because you're charging a fair price for your services, the services are high quality, by the way. We do not believe that just because someone's at a nonprofit or a low-cost clinic, that the quality of their care should be somehow compromised. And so Our team is exceptional. The surgeries that we're providing and the wellness care that we're providing is exceptional. And there's room to do that in a nonprofit model. And so I think about any city in the country, and this is just ballpark, the top 50% of household income folks, top 50% of pet owners from an income standpoint, they can go see a general practice vet. That's who they're seeing right now. The bottom 50% are not currently seeing a vet at all in many cases, or they're seeing whatever limited services are available. So this model is based on serving, again, the folks in that middle range, 25 to 75%. And it's the biggest cohort. It's the largest group of people based on research that are not getting veterinary care right now. And I think we need to make big strides in serving those folks over the next couple of years across the country.
Well, if anybody wants to find out more information on Flatbush Cats, or wants to make an appointment, maybe they've never heard of the clinic. They're like, oh, I need to take my cat in. Do you have a website, or how do people get a hold of you and find out?
Yeah, folks can reserve services at our vet at flatbushvet.org. Flatbush Cats, I think our Instagram is a great way to see the work that we're doing every day. So we posting there about not just the community work that we're doing with cats, but we also posting about our community clinics that we offer. And so Flatbush Cats Instagram is a great way to get in touch. And if anyone wants to join us as a monthly supporter and make this work possible, they can donate at our website, flatbushcats.org.
Is there anything else that I missed? Is there anything that we didn't cover or any last points that you want to make to anybody who's watching or listening to this?
I just want to thank you, Rae, for asking these questions, talking to folks around the country. This is hard work, right? And one of the things that has been motivating and inspiring for me is I'm just beginning to connect with other professionals like you. And it's validating, oh, I'm not taking crazy pills. there are other people who see this is absolutely insane, and maybe if we get enough of those folks together, we can just change the industry. So thank you for connecting folks and doing what you do.
You're welcome, and thanks, Will, for coming on. And of course, this wouldn't be possible without all of our viewers. So thanks for tuning in to the AWIP podcast and supporting me and Will and everything that we do. And remember, spay is the way.